So this next segment should be for the um, Creationist Bootcamp at Genesis Baptist Church. This informational video exposes the truth about the Australopithecine claims, these basically mini Sasquatch-like creatures here you see, of human evolution. Now, the evolutionists, they really believe in these things, you know, and there's very little evidence for them. I remember growing up when I was young, one of my friends that was an evolutionist basically showed me something like this, and, you know, believe that this skull, even though it's in pieces and was glued together, is obviously evidence of human evolution. I mean, that's what the professionals claim it is, so there it is. And unless that's fake, then human evolution must be true. And I mean, that's basically what I was handed. So I think as a creationist, especially young earth creationist, it's good to be aware of these claims from paleoanthropology so that you can address the human evolution believers, you know, because if they believe in human evolution, then that is a barrier for them believing in Jesus Christ. So I think that addressing this is very important. So we'll get into that, and hopefully it won't take more than an hour. Like I said, when I was young, a friend showed me basically something like this online and made the claim from there that it is absolute evidence for human evolution. Now when I look at it, I see a chimpanzee skull because I've studied more of the skulls and the differences between, say, chimp and gorilla and human, and Australopithecine claims. So, like here you have the crest atop the skull, and it's kind of like a crown that goes all the way across. You can kind of see it from the side view here, but that is not present in humans, you know? So, I mean, it's obviously a chimpanzee skull. Even the dip in the face and the brow ridge, it's a dead giveaway, so. It is not human, that's for sure. But, you know, this claim is pretty far down on this pan line, on this Australopithecine line, shown here. Here we go. So you have the purple line going up in the center, and that's the chimpanzee line. Human evolution basically suggests that the purple line became the royal blue Australopithecine line. So the ancestors of what would be modern chimpanzees are supposed to be related to the ancestors of humankind, which their claim is the Australopithecine. These Sasquatch-like beings with human bottoms and chimpanzee tops. So, you know, these are some very interesting looking characters. They try to make them look as human as possible to push their story. There are many claims about these creatures, okay? And one of them is that there's hundreds of individuals that have been discovered, when really it's more like there's been hundreds of pieces that are claimed to be Australopithecine, when what you really have is a bunch of pieces of chimpanzees and humans, okay? Their teeth. Here's a good example of what they actually have as far as Australopithecine. There are 7 major partial skeletal finds. And from these 7, this entire chart is imagined. So you have from Australopithecus remedius all the way to Sediba and Africanus and Lucy. Okay? All imagined from 7 partial skeletal finds. And the most complete skeletal find is Lucy, the AL288-1, and STW573. Now, it's been argued that STW573, this Littlefoot discovery, is more complete than Lucy. However, I disagree. I mean, the Littlefoot discovery, the STW 573 main serpentine cave by Clark. Um, sure, there's more remains to speak of, but they're actually rather deteriorated, destroyed by the fossilization process, compression from the flowstone that they were captured in, and preserved in. The flow of water has badly deteriorated the pelvis of this, where the AL28-1 is actually better preserved and is less mangled. So, like I was saying, the SW 573, although there might be more remains to speak of, it's actually rather incomplete when you consider a full skeleton has over 200 remains. And more than half of those remains are actually in the feet and in the hands. And while the STW 573 does have a pretty complete hand, uh, both of its feet, for the most part, and the other hand is missing. So you have, uh, just right there, you have a skeleton that's at best, like 70% complete. Now, Lucy could be considered even more complete because you have, while there's less remains, you can reflect them, you know? And because of that, you actually have a more complete skeleton that's been less um, deteriorated by the fossilization process, I think, with Lucy. So I think my point stands that Lucy's probably the most complete discovery. The MH2 and MH1 on the right are sort of newer discoveries. Um, they're they look sort of partial, I'd say. I mean, like, they're more complete than some of the Africanus here, which are basically like the pelvic and vertebrae. So yeah. So going back to it, you have Lucy. She's basically the most complete. Here you have her in the Ethiopian safe at the Museum of Natural History in Ethiopia. She's their national treasure. She's on their money. Um, what else can be said? You still have the baboon remain that was discovered in the Lucy conglomeration by Gary Sawyer back in 2015 in the New York Museum of Natural History, American Museum of Natural History in New York City. Sorry, Gary Sawyer discovered this back in 2015, and since then, like, the news has come out, but they still yet to remove this vertebrae that belongs to a baboon. So that's a good point to be made. And for people to be aware of that, it's a known fact that the Lucy conglomeration is, in fact, including a remain that it shouldn't, but they leave it in there for historical value, I guess. So while they know that it doesn't belong with Lucy, they keep it in the box. And there it is, right at the top. And it's the only neck vertebrae that they included with Lucy. So now that they've discarded that, there's actually no neck vertebrae either. And you have, let's talk about the Lucy's face. Isn't she beautiful? Anyway. And you have Lucy's skull fragments. Now, they discovered 6 skull fragments with the Lucy discovery. Wait, hang on now. They discovered 6 skull fragments that they interpreted as belonging to this individual. And from that, they created the Lucy skull on the right. As you can see, the white pieces are imagined, or the white portions of the skull are imagined, and the dark golden brown pieces are the ones you see on the left. Okay. So basically glued this to the model of what they'd say is an Australopithecine skull. And it's imagined from these 6 pieces. Now, that's a huge leap in logic. Now, when you realize that these 6 skull fragments are all that they've got to imagine the skull from, you have to consider how they were found and how they were discovered. And I actually got this book here from Johansson, who is accredited with discovering the Lucy conglomeration. Okay, this book has everything in it you could ever want to know about the Lucy discovery, I'd say. You've got maps, you've got how it was discovered, you got some photos here. I mean, when I first started studying this topic, I really believed that these guys were being pretty honest, as far as how they were discovering the remains. Like, I assumed that Lucy was from the general area, all the same area. It was kind of found together, maybe. Like, all the pieces of her could have been found in the same spot. When this doesn't seem to be the case, because what they did at the Afarensis, or at the Afar region, uh, the Afar location, this dig site, was they basically shoveled gravel down the side of the hill and collected it at the bottom of the hill and then laid it out on long pieces of cloth next to the Awash River, which is in the Afar region there. And then they picked through all that gravel to pick out all the pieces of what would be hominids, they'd claim. So this isn't a case where, say, the partial skeleton was all found in the same area. This is more of a case where they dug a bunch of the top layer of gravel off of a hillside and picked through it to find pieces. And when they had picked out their pieces and put them all into a box, they made a claim that they had found a brand new hominid. And Lucy was the name. So, as you see, how they discovered it was a little bit different than what we're told. There aren't hundreds of these individuals. There's Lucy, as far as the afarensis goes. There's Lucy, and there's the Dakika child, and the Dakika child is even less complete than Lucy is. So that's about the whole of it. These human evolution believers, this is like their religious artifact, and no one can question their religious artifact, because then you're going against their religion, their dogmatic belief system. Like, Lucy has to be true. You can't question it. And that's why, like, even though these are fossil remains, they haven't attempted to test them for DNA. Okay? When a lot of these remains in here look pretty new, and I mean, I think that they should take a more critical look. It's the fact that it took over 40 years to realize that a baboon bone was included in this conglomeration. That is very revealing, and it shows that the paleoanthropological community is not taking a critical look at these original fossils, or at least a critical enough look. I mean, if a baboon vertebrae escaped detection for over 40 years, then they are not taking a critical look at this. So that's what we're doing now. And what we've found has really brought to light a few things. So, looking at this conglomeration, this what's claimed to be Lucy, this single partial skeleton that they dug out the side of the hill and then picked out of a collection of gravel off of long sheets across or along the Awash River. This conglomeration is not very complete, and all the remains are cracked and broken, but they are not deteriorated as bad as they could be. So what you do have here with Lucy is a great example of what's called a sacrum, and that's the triangular bone at the base of your vertebral column. And this bone supports your butt, and it's basically your butt bone. And the holes in this bone are where the nerves and muscles pass through to anchor your butt. So what we're doing here is we basically were able to get good photos of the Lucy sacral composite. So, and then compare it to a human female. Now we're comparing to females because Lucy is supposed to be a female. So, and what we found is that the Lucy sacrum looks quite like a human sacrum. In fact, it's my opinion that the Lucy, or the sacrum included in the Lucy conglomeration, is a human sacrum. It's certainly not between chimpanzee and human. It has all the same features that a human sacrum has. So we'll get into that a little bit. What can be said? You've got the sacrum. Now, this is the entire pelvis of the Lucy conglomeration, which is unarguably the most famous fossil discovery on the planet. This Lucy found by Johansen. Now, the ilium is reconstructed. It was pieced together. It was picked out of the hillside. Now, this was actually all found together. The ilium was found in pieces, but at the same spot. And the one on the left is a replica and inverted and reconstructed version of the one on the right. So when they hook this together and you see the pelvis on the lower left, and they actually articulate it, put it together for us to view, you got to remember that the wing of the pelvis is actually quite angled compared to what you would probably have been naturally. Okay, because this was found in pieces and not as a whole. It's not really great evidence to be used. However, the sacrum was actually in one piece and fully fused. So this is probably the best piece of an afarensis claim to look at and to be able to compare to modern humans and chimpanzees to see what it could have been. I mean, is it an Africanus or afarensis? Or is this afarensis species comprised of human and ape remains? And that was my question. Now, when I realized that the sacrum, first of all, was triangular and not as acute as the chimpanzee sacrum. I mean, this is far different, okay, than the human sacrum and then the sacrum that's included in Lucy, as well as the ilia, okay? So the ilia looks different. Like I said, that's a reconstruction. But it doesn't look like a chimpanzee or tree-dwelling ape ilium. In fact, I'd say it looks more human than anything. So here you have the Lucy conglomeration. Here you have the Lucy pelvis. It's got a human-looking sacrum and a fairly human-looking ilium, if you consider that the ilium is a reconstruction and pieced together like a jigsaw puzzle. But since the sacrum was the only piece that was found fused together, and as it would have been in nature, other than a little bit of compression, probably from the fossilization process, because a lot of bones get flattened out during this, it is the most complete piece. So that's what I had to compare to modern humans and to chimpanzees, and I worked from there. The Lucy sacrum has 8 sacral foramina, and like I said, those are the holes in the sacrum that are formed when the sacral segments or vertebra are fused together to create this triangular shaped bone. So the Lucy sacrum has 8 sacral holes for the nerves to flow through and the muscles, and so does the human sacrum. Now, the human sacrum is the same shape, size, curvature, and the holes are in the same orientation, the same placement as a human sacrum. These holes also are at the same angle coming out of the sacrum. So it's my opinion that this sacrum included in the Lucy conglomeration is actually a human sacrum. I'd love to debate anyone about this fact, okay? And it is definitely not transition.
transitional appearing. Instead, it looks fully human.
Additionally, you have on the apes, you have 10 sacral foramina in all apes and monkeys. Now you have, unless of course they're missing a sacral segment, which does happen, but it also happens in humans, so we've got something there. But what you do have is a fully different shape, a different curvature of the sacrum. The foramina are in different placement. Okay, the shape of the sacral segments are much thinner, they're not robust. And then the holes, the sacral foramina, are at different angles than what they are in the human sacrum. Okay, so when comparing these, like, we were astonished at how human-like this Lucy sacrum was. And there's a great variation within humankind, when it comes to bone density, body frame. Okay, the skeletal system varies between peoples. Okay, so every bone in the body varies as much as the human spectrum does as far as the skeletal system. So for me, it's obvious that the sacrum included in this conglomeration was misinterpreted as an Australopithecine remain, since there's so few of them to go by and compare to. We've got, and by the way, this is the most complete sacrum that they have for any Australopithecine. And it looks just like a human sacrum. So there is no transition. There is no evolution. What you have is a box full of human and ape remains. And I guess a baboon remain too, so there's a monkey in there, So the long taught narrative that the Lucy conglomeration, that there was only a single individual in that hillside, has been proven incorrect. And this was some fact that they've often leaned on to reinforce their belief in human evolution's belief that this Lucy conglomeration is actually transitional and a real creature, is that they say that there was no other individuals found in that hill. So, and there was no repeated remains. Okay, that's the other story. How could that possibly be if they've already found this baboon bone in the Lucy conglomeration? Obviously, there was more than one individual in the hillside, and that old argument is demolished. In fact, now it shines through that Lucy, this conglomeration, is actually a mix of different species, not only different individuals, but different species remains. Fully misinterpreted, whether intentionally or unintentionally. It's a misinterpreted discovery. And that's what Lucy is. So a little bit of a technical difficulty there. All right, so now we can get back into the other Australopithecine, all one of them. So we have Lucy, which is the main, most famous fossil paleoanthropological discovery of all time. Johann celebrated the 50th year of Lucy discovery, because it'd be 1974. So you have Lucy being discovered in 1974. But you also have, just before that, is these Laetoli footprints. And these are famous footprints, probably almost as famous as Lucy herself. So, and as you can see, back to our main picture that we started with, is Lucy has human feet, which is interesting because they never really found any of Lucy's feet, if you look at this. Littlefoot, there's a partial foot of Littlefoot. And they do have a foot that they claim belongs to an afarensis. Okay. But it's like what would be an adolescent claim, afarensis. So the foot is very, very small. And it would be like 2.5 inches long. Okay. So it's a small foot. Now that foot's not shown here because that's nothing compares to skeleton. All they have is the one foot, and it seems like a human foot with the heel. So now Littlefoot, which is interesting, actually has just a partial foot. The STW 573, which is the other individual we're going to talk about, because it's like I said, probably the second most complete individual of the 7 individuals that the entire Australopithecine line is imagined from. This entire blue line, this entire blue branch. Everything shooting off of it is composed of these 7 skeletons and pieces of individuals. Gari, right there on the left, that left hook that comes up off of the royal blue, like that's represented by just a couple mandibles or jawbones for the entire species, imagined from just a jawbone. No foramen magnum or skull case to mention, where you could see the placement of, say, the vertebrae hole that goes into the brain, the foramen magnum. No foramen magnum to even guess by, and they're trying to claim that these individuals are bipedal. Okay, it's a leap to expect that an animal is bipedal just because the foramen magnum is placed in what would be an upright position. That doesn't mean that the animal walks on its back legs, for one thing. But to claim bipedalism from 2 jawbones is a huge leap. And that's the story with most of these Australopithecines. So it's not a case
where there's hundreds of individuals, as claimed, but instead,
a case where there's 7 partial skeletons that make up this entire hypothetical species of baby Sasquatches that human evolutionists believe lived 3 million years ago to like 1 million years ago. This whole story is conjecture. It's not science, okay? And they want to come at you and claim it's science when what it really is a story. And it's held together by pieces of evidence that shouldn't necessarily be connected, okay? What you have here is a case of misinterpreted remains. Yes, they're real remains. I'm not saying they're plastic. Okay, I'm not saying they're fake like that. What I'm saying is that these remains were misinterpreted, whether it was intentional or unintentional. That's up to you to decide. I mean, to me, it looks like it's pretty intentional because I don't see how paleoanthropologists could look at these same remains and come up with the stories that they do about them and be honest about it. Yeah, so they've rated, like, and here's another thing, like, you see these teeth in these skulls, and it's like they've got more teeth in their head than most modern humans do, okay? So you have a situation where a lot of these teeth are actually placed in the skull after the fact, and they'll find the teeth away from the maxillary arcade or the maxilla, and the mandible, are sort of reconstructed after the finds. And you also have a fact where the canine teeth, okay, they aren't as protruded as they are in adolescence as they are in adulthood. So you have that fact too, which can affect the size of the canines, which is a fact that's often used to try and prove a transition. So here you have an example where the canines are sort of backed off a bit, and this is actually a bonobo chimp skull. So you have the inferior underside view of a bonobo, and it looks just like an afarensis claim. So why should I believe, that this brown afarensis skull, which is mostly fake, because all the dark brown is fake, and all the light brown, which is that little tiny piece up at the top, is the only part that they discovered. So this entire imagined skull here looks just like a chimp skull. But I'm supposed to believe it's transitional in some way. Okay, this is what I mean about it not being any real science when it comes to paleoanthropology and just being like more conjecture, guesswork at best. When you're inventing complete skulls off of 6 fragments of skull cap, that's conjecture. That's not science. I'm sorry. The white pieces of the skull are imagined. the dark brown on that skull on the right, are what they discovered of Lucy. And here it is again, laid out, showing everything that they've got for Lucy. You know, there's no feet, there's no hands. And they want to say that this thing's 40% complete? No, no. Not when there's 100 bones in your hands and feet alone. That's half your skeleton that's missing right there. So, even though they never found any feet, they have fossilized footprints. And we'll get back to the Laetoli footprints here, because these are just as famous as Lucy, I'd say. Laetoli footprints, I think they were found in 1972, a couple years before the Lucy discovery, by Mary Leakey and her team. And Lucy Leakey was there as well. They worked in the Olduvai Gorge area mostly, but this was her baby. Mary Leakey discovered this, and when she did, she remarked at how human-like they appeared. And this was a big deal because, you know, they were coming up with basically human evolution narrative, what these things are supposed to look like at this certain time. You know, what our hypothetical ancestors are supposed to look like 3 million years ago. And they couldn't decide, like, did they have an offset big toe that shows transition, or did they have a regular human big toe? Well, it turns out that when they discovered these footprints, that they claimed through radiometric dating must be at least 3.2 million years old. Okay. And you know they're married to the radiometric dating technique, which gives obscene ages for young lava flows and ash layers. You, you have a situation where they found human footprints and then tried to claim that they belonged to Sasquatches. So, are these Australopithecine. And that's why when you see the Australopithecine, whether it's Africanus, Afarensis, you're going to see human feet, okay? All right. Like I said in the beginning, you have a chimpanzee top, even the longer arms for better tree climbing, and then you have a human bottom. Like, this is not transitional. In my mind, a transition would be partway between, not half evolved into human and half still chimpanzee. That makes no sense, but that's how it is with human evolution and the remains they've got right now. Because what they're doing is they're putting human bottoms on chimp tops. And all 7 of these. What you can see of them, and as you can see, the pelvis isn't very complete in the majority. Lucy has the most complete sacrum. So, now the Laetoli footprints, they took early castings of these footprints, and this video, or this photo, is online, but it's pretty rare. This is also from Johansson's book. Now, when you're looking at here is an early Laetoli footprint casting from this site, and it's the smaller individual of the two walking through this pathway. So the smaller pair of feet compared to a normal young adult's foot. And what you see is it's about half the size. Now, children have smaller human feet than adult humans. And they're basically saying that these footprints are too small, or they're smaller than the average human. So obviously they're belong to the Australopithecine. Now, what's amazing is when you look at this photo, and it might be kind of hard to see from where you're at, but when you look at this photo, you can actually see the outline of the big toe on that casting of the early Laetoli footprints. And I swear that the big toe of these footprints is just like a human's. So they really do believe that these things had human feet and then a completely chimpanzee top. The brain case is supposed to be the same size as the chimpanzees. You know, so they really do have a chimpanzee top connected to a human bottom. And that's what's going on with the Australopithecine here. So if anyone wants to know, you know, if they come at you with a skull like this and say, this is absolute evidence for human evolution, and until you can refute this skull, then I don't have to listen to you. And you can practically tell them that, well, that looks like a chimpanzee skull to me. I mean, why wouldn't it be? Why should we believe that it's some super rare mini Sasquatch that don't even exist now? I mean, this kind of seems like they're the ones with the burden of proof because they want to believe in many Sasquatches that lived 3.2 million years ago. You know, and I mean, what's going on is they're lacking evidence for this fantastic story that they're trying to swing our way. Okay, that they push into our lives, that they push into our plane of view in every single media, you know, the TV, the education system. They're pushing these critters onto the public eye, and they're just not real. And the stories that they're spewing about them are so far from the truth that there's hundreds of individuals when there are 7 partial skeletons, if you can call them partial. I mean, when I look at these, I see 2 partial skeletons and then a couple with pelvis and vertebrae. And not complete pelvises, not complete sacrums, but partial ones. Okay? A few rib bones, yeah. So Lucy's the most complete. And Lucy appears to just be human, and ape remains, and at least 1 baboon remain. So that is the story of Lucy. And now I can talk briefly on Littlefoot because that's one that comes up quite a bit. And we'll cover that, and then you guys can be on your way. So SCW 573, the one outlined in red here, we've been working on this and basically getting the best photos we possibly can of the discovery and then comparing them to different remains of modern animals and humans. So it was quite a surprise to find out that the SCW 573's Littlefoot, which is what it's named after, because, you know, they're comparing it to Bigfoot. He's like, Bigfoot, he's got a little foot, so why don't we call it Littlefoot? So even they're going with the whole Sasquatch idea. It's not just me. But so they found Littlefoot's foot in a closet at the museum, I believe. And basically it wasn't found with the skeleton, but instead in a box of remains that was scavenged from the actual mining that went on in the Serpentine cave system before the paleoanthropology that went on there. So there was a lot of debris removed from the cave system by the miners, and a lot of stuff was cast outside of the cave, as any mining operation would do. And then later on, paleoanthropologists went through and picked through and tried to find every hominid or human remain that they could in that pile of debris. So, all right, action. You guys still have some connection? All right, here we go. So yeah, back to the SCW 573. As I said, the foot was found apart from the skeleton, but so was everything else. One thing you can say about the SCW 573 is that it was found not articulated or connected to each other, but instead apart from itself. So one thing that it does have is a pretty complete skull. Although, like I said, the SCW 573 skull was badly mangled and deteriorated from the fossilization process. But as far as Australopithecus go, it's one of the best skulls that we have that is claimed to be an Australopithecine. However, like I said, with the sacrum of Lucy, because it's the most complete of the finds, that's the one we get to look at because that's the one we're going to be able to compare to modern animals and humans and see exactly what went on. Now, to me, it seems to be a shame that Clark, first of all, you know, okay, so Sturkfontein Cave, This is called Australopithecus prometheus, or STW573, also known as Littlefoot, is often called Australopithecus prometheus, and that's what it's been named by its founder. So we're going to call it Prometheus. The reason that's called Australopithecus prometheus is because it was found in the same cave system that legend has it that Prometheus was chained to a rock as punishment for bringing fire or civilization to mankind. And so they named this guy Prometheus because he was found in a rock in the cave. The skeleton, like I said, is one of the most complete skeletons claimed to be an Australopithecine. It's just a shame that Clark must not have had a gorilla skull to compare to it, or maybe he'd have realized, what he's doing and misinterpreting, I guess. All right, so upon comparing this skull to modern apes, we came to find that it more closely matches the gorilla than even chimpanzee, which makes very little sense because, as you remember back here on the chart, that the pan line is where Australopithecus comes from, not the gorilla line. So the fact that this skull has more gorilla-like features destroys their narrative. Okay, so upon looking at this and comparing this skull to other modern skulls of great apes and humans, we discovered that it has the same sutures on the skull, which is where the pieces of skull cap fuse together during the course of the life of the animal. Okay, so it was interesting to know that the sutures of this skull, the STW570 Littlefoot skull, match exactly with the pattern on a gorilla skull, which is quite different than the human or the chimpanzee. Okay, so just like the number of sacral foramina in the sacrum are the same between human and this afarensis lucy, the sutures of the Littlefoot skull seem to exactly match the gorilla skull. And that was pretty interesting. But it doesn't stop there. And the reason that we ended up comparing or trying to find even gorilla remains to compare to the Littlefoot skull and the skeletal system is because the literature surrounding the SW573 Littlefoot discovery keeps referring back to how gorilla-like, or first of all, it says how arboreal ape or how tree-dwelling ape it looks, or the remains look. Even the arms and the so the arms and the shoulder blades and all the shoulders look quite ape-like, but not just ape-like, but gorilla-like. So all the literature was pointing us in the direction that we would want to compare the STW573 remains to gorillas and not chimpanzees, like in the case with the afarensis. So, and that's what we did. And come to find out, the sutures are exactly the same. But it doesn't end there. Okay, because we compared the skulls and the mandible of the different apes and humans. Okay, now come to find out, the SW573 Littlefoot skull, like I said, it's been compressed, at least as far as the brain cavity or the brain case. The cranium has been compressed, which is obvious here. I mean, you can see it crushing down into the brow ridge and how pushed in that skull is. You can also see from the top view that there's a break across the ridge here on the SW573 where the skull's pushed up and probably in. So you have that situation. But it looks pretty similar, even though it's been crushed, to the gorilla there. So let's go back to here. Now, what I want to point out, which is very important, is the different anatomy of the mandible. You have the ramus, which is like the body of the arm of the mandible. Okay. You have the angulomandible, which is the circumference of the back of the mandible there. And then you have the neck, the coronoid process. Like all these, remember these words, okay? So we're going to look at these two skulls. Now, what I noticed right away is that the whole bottom of this looks almost exactly alike. And when you realize that the brain case or the cranium is pushed in, compressed, then that makes sense for the difference in the cranium. But when you look at the mandible here, and again, like I said, the ramus, okay, and you compare the ramus to the other ramus, it's very boxy. Okay, both of them are very boxy. The mandibular body, the bottom there is the same shape. Okay, the coronoid process, that angled bit going up into the skull, see coronoid process, that's all the same shape. Okay, even the angle of the mandible, okay, the angle of the mandible, the circumference of the angle of the mandible is the same, especially when you compare it to human and to the chimpanzee skull. The angle of the mandible is far different, even obtuse. It gets greater than 90 degrees, where with the gorilla skull, it almost seems acute, where it'd be less than 90 degrees. Okay, and this is on the SW573 Littlefoot skull, the same angle of the mandible, the same coronoid process and head of the mandible, the neck of the mandible, all look the same, especially when compared to human and chimpanzee skulls. So I think we know exactly what's going on here. We have tree-dwelling ape remains and human remains being collected, being put into boxes, and then being claimed to be something that they absolutely are not. Okay, pieces of evidence claimed to belong together that shouldn't necessarily be connected. And it's pretty obvious here that Clark has a gorilla skull to me. So we'll be dealing with that. Too bad Clark has passed since the discovery, and I'm not able to write him, but I'm sure I will get in contact with the proper paleoanthropologist, and I would love to discuss just how much alike the SCW 573 Littlefoot skull is to a gorilla skull, and ask them exactly why I can't find so much information on this discovery. But so there you have it. There's no good reason to believe in human evolution, especially from the fossil side of things. The claims surrounding the fossils that there are just not true. There's not hundreds of individuals that have been discovered. What they have is hundreds of pieces of several individuals that happen to be chimpanzees, gorillas, a baboon, and some human remains. And it's as simple as that. There's no real ape named Lucy that fell out of a tree. No, my friend, not when she's composed of human, baboon, and chimp remains. This is a Frankenstein, a mix of different individuals, even species, and not really what it's claimed to be by the human evolutionists. Thank you for listening. I hope that this is informational enough for you guys, and enjoy your week. This is C Science signing out.